Hello, everyone. I'm very happy here to be opening this podcast with Mr. John, the man behind Teknon. Fatima, who's a very dear friend of mine, and is here to tell us the story about her son who's been having Teknon for 4 months. Yeah. So I want to start by asking Mr. John, what is Teknon?
Technon is a natural formula that is metabolic based, that does two things. It clears the metabolic pathways, so the communication between the gut-brain axis is clear and effective, and also it works to repopulate the bacteria, the proper bacteria and enzymes in the microbiome or the gut.
And how is the gut-brain axis related to autism, if I may ask?
New science has shown and proven that the microbiome or the gut-brain axis, it actually develops at the same time as the central nervous system. And if there's a disruption in the gut, okay, then the signals that the gut-brain axis is essentially the communication system between the signals that come from the gut through the vagus nerve to the neurons in the brain, okay, that tell you to smile, to yell, to laugh, to lift your right arm, and do it clearly. Mm-hmm. All right. So what we now know is that what science knows for a fact is that many things that have to do with mood or the brain's function, the signals actually emanate from the gut. So you have to have the proper bacteria, the proper ratios of those bacteria, and the proper enzymes in the gut, so that the communication system between the gut and the brain is clear and effective. Everybody here has heard somebody say, I had a gut feeling about that.
Yeah.
Okay, it's really true. We have the same number of brain neurons in our gut as we do in our brain. Okay, yeah. And they communicate through the metabolic pathways, through the vagus nerve, which is connected to every major organ in the body. And so the signal either is received clearly at the vagus nerve and goes on to the neurons in the brain and the proper lobes of the brain, or it's not.
Wow.
And so I'm going to go a bit off script here. But so it's really interesting that you say that, because Yusuf and Ali, both of my boys, they both had major gut issues very, very early on. So they were taking massive doses of antibiotics, and Yusuf actually had NEC, which is basically his guts were rotting because he was so preterm. So it's really interesting that you say that. And a lot of people have been talking about the gut-brain axis.
Yeah, true.
And you kind of don't think it's actually a real thing until you see something like Teknon make this difference, right?
Yes. Recognize that virtually every person on the spectrum, young or old, have had a disrupted gut from the day they were born. And if you don't, the signals originate from the gut, from the microbiome.
Right.
Okay, and if you, in an autistic child, and forgive me for this putting this in real layman's terms, but this way it's easy to explain and understand.
Yeah.
With a disrupted gut, the signal that goes to the brain, and let's say the intent is to smile, okay? So the signal goes in a neuronormal person, it goes through up to the vagus nerve in a clear straight line, and then it goes from the vagus nerve to the proper lobe of the brain and the proper neurons in the brain to say smile, okay? With an autistic person or somebody on the spectrum, depending on where they're at on the spectrum. But let's say what happens is that signal comes through, instead of in a straight line, it comes in broken signals, okay? And then it goes to the vagus nerve and then it gets passed out. But instead of, again, being a straight line going to the proper lobe of the brain for whatever function it's being told to do, it's like taking paint and splattering it up against the wall. They don't know what to do. You know, stemming and, you know, they're being overstimulated and everything, stimulated and everything else. It's caused because that signal has just been, you know, these poor children, they don't know what to do. They know something's wrong. We wonder why they're so stressed and have anxiety. They know something's wrong.
Right.
They just don't know what to do about it.
Yeah.
Or how to express it.
Correct.
Yeah. So what's the story of Teknon? Like, how did it come about? What made you think, gee, I want to create this product that's going to help,
I
particularly
love this story. I love this story.
Really, yeah, I've
We
never
have time
heard
for
it.
me to tell.
Yeah,
Okay.
absolutely.
How Technon came about is I've been a research scientist for almost 50 years. And all my research has been on metabolic syndrome diseases, primarily type 2 diabetes, Alzheimer's, dementia, and Parkinson's, which are all metabolic diseases. Yeah. I was speaking at the, they call it now Davos of Healthcare in New York. It was the U.S. Arab Healthcare Summit, and on metabolic syndrome. And after my presentation, two people came out of the audience and asked to talk to me. And they were from the University of Wisconsin, and they were trying to create a blood test that would be highly accurate and could be done at a very early age. Because for autism now, what they only use SCAR, to test for autism. They only can use the CARS scoring system. They can't do it till they're 5 or 6 years old. It's very subjective and highly inaccurate. Okay, there's many people who are on the spectrum that were misdiagnosed, saying they weren't, and there's some people that were diagnosed as being on the spectrum and they aren't. Okay?
Right.
Yeah.
So they asked me, because of my, and I'll put this in quotes, my knowledge and expertise in metabolic diseases, because they'd come to the conclusion that autism is primarily a metabolic disorder, not a neurological disease.
Wow.
So it's a metabolic disorder that manifests through neurological...
Okay. The signal originates in the gut.
Right.
Okay. The symptom comes out of the brain.
Right.
Okay, from the neurons in the brain. So I worked with them for a few months, but I realized that I didn't agree with the path that they were on. I mean, they hadn't even identified that the amino acid profile of a non-neuronormal child was significantly different than a neuronormal one was.
Right.
But in the process of doing that, I met somebody in Madison, Wisconsin, who had a friend in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, who had a cousin who owned an autism treatment center in California.
Right. Okay.
And so they were talking about what I was talking about, and I hadn't decided what to do or what I was going to do. Truthfully, when I got into it with the people at the University of Wisconsin, I didn't really know much about autism. I mean, I knew the words and stuff, but I didn't know anybody that had an autistic person in their family, and I really hadn't gotten a full grasp of what the magnitude of the issue was.
Right.
But anyway, this lady, her name's Sherry Toast, wonderful human being. She asked me if I would come out and speak to some of the parents, because this was a new revolution. Look, there's been billions of dollars spent and many years by large pharmaceutical companies trying to develop a drug that would treat a neurological condition.
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
And it's not neurological.
To date, not a single treatment has come out of all of that. And the reason is it's not a neurological disease or disorder. It's a metabolic one primarily.
Wow.
So anyway, I go out. I agreed to go out and speak with these parents, and I was doing it as much to learn more about the autism
in the community and what this
category.
is. Yeah.
Yeah, and to get a better grasp of what it really was about. And when I agreed to do it, she said there was one parent that didn't want to talk in front of the rest of the crowd, and would I come earlier and speak with her and answer some questions and so on. So I agreed to do that. So when I got there, we were in this large room which is set up for autistic
Parents.
children and adults too. They had people up there in their early 30s even. But what they were set up, it was laid out so nobody could hurt themselves or do anything. Okay. So we sat down, and the young man came in with his mother, And I'm a man, and I'm old, and I don't guess age as well, okay? So I thought this young man was probably 7 years old. That's what went through my mind. I learned later he was 13,
Okay.
okay? I also found out he looked malnourished, and I found out that he was 13 years old, and he would only eat French fries. You know, he had problems with his teeth and his gums already.
Yeah.
I mean, think about being 13 and the only thing you've been eating is French fries. Okay. So anyway, we all sat down. She had in this big room, she had 3 chairs set out, and we started talking. This young man's name was Ethan. And so he started jumping around and making a noise. And I'm not accurate in this, but the only thing I can come up with is kind of like a barking sound.
Okay.
And he was bouncing around, and he was jumping into these gigantic trash bins that they had for the kids there to throw their papers in and so on. And the mother says, you know, Ethan, will you come sit down beside us and be quiet and let us talk? Being a typical young boy, he ignored her. Okay.
Yeah.
So he kept doing it, jumping in. She tells him again more strongly. He completely ignored her. So the head of the clinic, Sherry, she says, Ethan, you know, please come down and sit down and let us speak with this gentleman. He ignored her too. Now, what went through my mind, none of this was pre-planned. I had no thought before the words came out of my mouth. But I guess I thought that maybe having a stronger voice, a male voice, that he would listen to me. So I said, Ethan, please, will you come over here and sit down and let your mother and I talk? He ignored me. Okay. So I got up and I went over to him, and you know, he didn't look at me, obviously, he's still looking down. And I said, Ethan, please come sit down with us and let your mother and I talk. And he looked down like this, and then he shakes his head, you know, kind of firmly. And I said, now, the only reason I would have said this, because I didn't pre-plan it, was because the mother I knew they were quite a religious family because of the jewelry she was wearing and how she spoke. But this came out just not by plan.
Spontaneously.
Yeah. I said, Ethan, if I was Jesus, what would you say to me? And it's like Ethan went stock still.
Wow.
And he looked up at me, and in his tiny little voice, he says, why me? And it just affected me significantly. So I put my hand on his shoulder and I said, Ethan, I'm going to help you. Now, this is before I created Teknon, but at that point, I knew I had to do something.
So it was Ethan.
I said, Ethan, I'm going to help you. He puts his hand in my pocket. I had a soup pan on, which are a little baggy, and he put his fingers like this, and he put them in my soup pocket pant. And he looked down, not looking at me, and he just looked at me for that brief second. And he walks over to where I was sitting in my chair. He
wouldn't let you go.
Sits down. He kept a death grip on me.
Wow.
And sat there, and we talked. And then when all the other people started coming in and we had to finish, they had us set up in rows where these long tables with chairs where they could sit. And then I had one smaller table in the front with an office-style chair. So I said, Ethan, I've got to go to the front and sit down and talk. You know, go with your mother. Wouldn't let me go. So I walk up front thinking, what am I going to do? I sit down in a chair, and it was one of those office chairs that rolls back and forth, and he curls around. He still got a hold of my pocket, but he curls around those rollers. So for an hour, I spoke.
And he was there.
But I was afraid to move because I'd roll over his hand or so. But he just stayed right there. And so we finished. There were 2 more parents that didn't want to ask questions, in front of the rest of the crowd and so on. So would I go to the back and speak with them? So I agreed to it. So I get up and said, Ethan, we have to go. And she follows right back with me and sits there, and I answer their questions. And then when we're all done, the father comes in and says, Ethan, let's go. We have to go home. Ethan didn't move. He just kept anchored to me. The father, and he had two siblings, a sister and another brother, and the mother. So they go out to their pickup truck, okay, outside and get in, but Ethan's still with me. So I'm thinking, well, if I walk out there and
Maybe he
stand
will.
stand by the truck, maybe he'll get in the truck and go. So I walk out there and I'm standing there, and the father goes, Ethan, get in the truck now. We have to go home. Ethan, he just looks up at me again. He just looks up at me, and in this tiny, small voice, he says, don't forget about me. And got in the truck. I knew at that point in time what I was going to do with the rest of my life.
The stories.
So from that day on, I dedicated all my scientists, my entire staff, to nothing but figuring out how we could treat something we knew nothing about, really, which was autism. But we had a 47-year head start because we'd been researching metabolic diseases for that entire time. And I learned many things quite quickly, mostly by talking with parents. Yeah. And in the research, from a scientific standpoint, now this is relatively new, just in the last few years, but anybody can look it up, okay? Science, medical science now knows that schizophrenia, depression, anxiety, autism spectrum disorders, okay, emanate from the gut. And you can treat them from the gut. They even know migraines come from the gut.
Wow. Yeah.
And that you can treat them that way. So we had a big head start, but I shut down everything we were doing other than from a research standpoint. And we took everything that we had been doing on metabolic diseases and applied those parts that were relative to autism, okay, and their symptoms, okay. And it took us from 2015 to 2023 to finalize it. We did some tests and we did some treatment before, but we treated some kids because one thing about Technon, there's no contraindications.
Yeah,
because it's natural.
It's all natural based, and what it does is two very simple things. First thing it does is we repopulate the gut with the proper bacteria and enzymes, and we clear the metabolic pathways so the communication link between the gut or the microbiome, the vagus nerve, and the neurons in the brain can be cleared, okay? And the signal is transmitted in a normal way. And like you talking about your child, they put them on antibiotics. That's one of the worst things you can do, because the antibiotics kill all the good bacteria as well as the bad bacteria. Yeah. Right? And if you put people on probiotics and they're not exactly the probiotics you need, you make them sick.
Yeah.
Yeah, true.
Okay? Make them feel bad.
Yeah.
So we did a lot of research.
How many scientists are on Teknon?
We have 93 MD PhDs that are part of our research team. And every moment that we were working, we worked on Teknon. And look, Teknon, how the name came about.
That's one of my questions. Yeah.
Okay, how the name came about?
Yeah.
I mean, to this day, even thinking about Ethan, okay, and by the way, I want everybody to know, Ethan is a highly functioning, essentially normal child. Not child, he's a young adult now.
Because you kept your promise and you did not forget about him.
Oh, I would have never backed away from that. Never. But you can't trademark hardly anything anymore.
Yeah.
Okay? Because everybody's used every name in the world. So I'm researching, because Teknon, I'm a scientist, but things have to mean something to me. You know, I do what I do because I get to. I have the privilege of doing it. And I wanted it to be something that represented something, not just a name that I could
Yeah.
pull out and trademark. And in doing the research, I came across exactly what I wanted. And Teknon, one of its meanings in ancient Greek,
Okay.
is child of God.
It's beautiful.
And I knew it didn't matter how many people in my organization said that's a terrible name. That was what the name was going to be. So that's how we arrived from here to there. Then I had to find the right. I knew what ingredients I wanted from a metabolic standpoint, but I didn't know what ingredients I wanted from a to replace the bacteria and the enzymes in the gut, because I hate in science using the word all or everything or whatever or everyone, but everyone that I know of that's on the spectrum has a disrupted gut.
Right.
Their microbiome is disrupted. Okay, so I knew we had to. I can do the metabolic part, but I had to get to the gut part. And my chief science officer is Dr. Aftab Ahmed. And he said, John, there's one thing that I'd like to introduce you to that you should consider. And he said, that's camel milk.
Okay.
I didn't know anything about camel milk, you know. But I did some research, and he provided me with a lot of information. Camel milk by itself won't do it.
Okay.
Camel milk will do some things for a few children. I mean, we tested, in all our focus group studies, we tested 3,100 children. Okay. Oh, and some adults. I mean, most were under 15. Some were up as old as 45. Okay. So 20s, 30s. We had some through the mix. But it hit me one night in bed asleep, I think. Okay. But I came awake and and the only thing I can think of is the greatest nutrition on earth is a new mother's nursing milk.
Yeah.
And everybody in the world has tried to recreate that, including me, and none of us have been successful. Okay? But there's an element in a specific type of camel, in their milk, there's the colostrum in it, or an extract from that colostrum, is virtually bioidentical to a new mother's nursing milk.
Wow.
And I knew that's what would do it.
Okay.
So then we had to find a way. Camel milk has a very short shelf life.
Right.
How do I mix it with the metabolic part of the formula and the delivery system? I want to say this also. We also have a delivery system in here.
Yeah.
The majority, if not all, of autistic people, because of their disrupted gut, they don't absorb much in the way of nutrition. They don't effectively absorb nutrition.
Okay.
Okay. So I had to figure out a way to get them to absorb it. And many years ago, Kodak, their medical division, developed a delivery system. They did it was accident. They were testing something else, and they found that the children, this is back in the 50s, they found that the children, that the product that they were testing them on were absorbing the nutrition they were trying to feed them, because they were working with undernourished children in Africa. Okay.
Right.
And they found that they were absorbing the nutrition at a significantly greater level.
Okay.
So I looked at that old research. I mean, I'd known about it, but I looked at it and went in depth and realized there's some things we can do to make it significantly superior. And so I developed that. We call it ERDS, which shows you how creative I am. Stands for Enhanced Rapid Delivery System.
Okay.
And-
Right. Okay. That idea. Okay.
Yeah.
Right.
And we patented it, and then we mixed it in. What we found is that the nutrients that are in Teknon, they're absorbed 300% greater and 500% faster, the rate of absorption. And the reason that's important is because when you have a disrupted gut, whatever you ingest hits the gut, the acid in the gut destroys most of the actives. So we wouldn't be able to deliver Teknon where they need it.
Right.
So, and that's why we also put it in a shaker, so it has to be mixed and shaked more. And you drink it because it goes down through the saliva glands, and with the ERDS and going through the saliva glands, it gets absorbed into the bloodstream before it hits the acid in your gut.
Ah, okay.
So Teknon is not camel milk, because that's a misconception. A lot of people say
Yeah,
it's camel milk.
it's camel milk.
Teknon is not camel milk. It has a specific camel milk extract that's based on the colostrum of this particular type of camel.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't want to mislead anybody. You can't go out and buy camel milk and think it'll do the same thing.
Yeah.
It'll be less than 17% effective based on all the studies we've done.
Okay.
And, there'll be a few that'll have some benefits, but you're still not clearing the metabolic pathways. All right. So you have to have, it's kind of like the total sum is worth significantly more, or the value is significantly greater than any one of the individual parts. So remember, it's not just camel milk, it's a camel milk extract of
And
the
other
colostrum.
ingredients as well, right?
Correct.
The longest anyone has ever been on Teknon.
It would be a 5.5 years.
5.5 years.
Okay.
From the first time we completed it and started testing. We had to go through all the toxicity tests and everything else. We had to make sure we didn't harm anybody, and but there are no contraindications.
So that's an interesting story. Fatima, how did you hear about Teknon, and how did you feel about it? Be open.
Be open. Right. So I heard about it through you. And when I tell the story, I talk about my wonderful crazy friend who tells me about this supplement that she heard about, that she is absolutely convinced is going to help my boys. And I'm like, yeah, okay, sure. You keep doing your thing, Amal. And then she said, no, really, Fatima, when it comes to Dubai, I need you to let Yusuf and Ali try it.
That was way before it came to Dubai.
Way before. This is like 2 years
When
ago,
we
maybe.
first met.
Yeah.
Maybe it was 2 years ago. And she rang me and she said, Fatima, she told me the story of how she met you and this supplement and the boy and Ethan. I think she mentioned the name Ethan, actually, now that I remember it. And this other young kid and all of that kind of stuff. I'm like, okay, sure. Because, for me, autism was a lifelong thing. You have it,
You
it
live
is what
with
it
it.
is, you live with it, you make the best of it. But I never thought of it like something that could change, right? And then I didn't hear about it for ages. And then she rings me again and she's saying, it's here, like Teknon is here and you need to come and try it with Yusuf. Now, in that time, Yusuf actually had, we had a diagnosis of a kidney disorder, of a liver kidney disorder, where he was basically a kidney stone machine and he just keeps producing these kidney stones. So we were with a nephrologist. And of course, my blockers were complete. The wall was up. It was like, no, I'm not going to give anything to this boy that could impact his kidneys or his liver or anything like that. And she said, just try it here. And I went to her office because I was going to stage an intervention, right? Like, Amal, you're losing it. Hun, I don't know what's going on, but something has happened and you're losing it. Like, you own a therapy center, for goodness sake. You're a person of position in the community and you're peddling something. Like, what is going on? So I was, and I took Yusuf with me.
And she cried.
And I'm like, and she said, Fatima, just take this and let him try it. So I took a photo of the ingredients and the nutrition profile. And I said, I'm not touching anything. Nothing's going into this boy until I speak to the nephrologist. So off I go to the nephrologist. And I think I have one of the coolest nephrologists in the country, if not the world. And he looks at it and he says, look, Fatima, and he's a medical doctor. And he looks at it and he says, look, there's nothing in here that tells me it will cure autism. But if you don't try it, you're going to regret it. And there are plenty of people who have kidney issues who don't have autism. So he said, give it a go. We'll keep testing him every 3 months and we'll adjust what we need to adjust if you feel that it's worth continuing. So I had to swallow my pride and go back to Amal and say, look, I'll give it a go. So
How long ago was that?
that
16
was
weeks.
yeah, that's about 16, 17 weeks ago now. I've actually lost count. It was early in June, and I know it was early in June because late in June, Yusuf had his first. Where I noticed it was actually starting to make a difference was when he was performing in the school musical. So Yusuf was at a very wonderful mainstream inclusive school. And they created sort of this part for Yusuf, and Yusuf is one of a set of triplets. So the three of them were on stage together. They were finding a way to include Yusuf in everyday activities and school and that sort of stuff. And what I noticed was it was back to the 80s. And you know, there's, I can't remember who the singer, someday somebody's going to make you want to turn around and say goodbye, that song. He was actually acting out. There was no dance moves. He was making his own dance moves exactly according to the song. And I'm like, this kid's listening, he's understanding, and he's responding. And that was only a couple of weeks in. And then I started paying a bit closer attention because I wasn't paying attention, because you know me. I've got a lot going on, John. It's like,
But you didn't believe it's going to work, right?
I didn't believe, no, absolutely not. I was like, I trust this, I love this woman, I trust her completely, but I think she's got this one wrong.
Yeah.
She's lost it. She's got something wrong here. But then I rang Amal because I realised it had been 11 years, almost 11, 10 and a half years since I had had a full night's sleep, because Yusuf doesn't sleep through the night. And then I realised we're sleeping through the night. And I rang Amal and I said, so Yusuf's sleeping through the night. And she goes, anything else? And I'm like, yeah, he's not wetting himself as much. He's still not continent, but, you know, it's not as frequent. It was every night, a couple of times a night. And I was, you know, he didn't want Pampers, and we had a mental thing about Pampers. So it was a big issue of getting him up and changing him and all that sort of stuff. But I said, yeah, he's sleeping tonight. She says, write down some more, just see what's happening. And then we were at a restaurant, and Yusuf was the child. The only way you could keep him quiet and entertained was on the phone. So the other two would get the colouring sheets with the crayons, and Yusuf would get the phone because, quite frankly, I want to eat my meal, right? And Mariam always protests, you know, oh, it's not fair. Yusuf gets the phone. I'm like, you know the drill, Mariam, just, you know, sit down. So she always puts a hand on Yusuf's sheet and pulls Yusuf's sheet. And this time, Yusuf put his hand on it and he pulled it back. Yeah.
It's mine.
Yeah, it's mine. And then he gets the orange crayon and he colours in the carrot, and he goes, carrots are orange. And then he gets the red one and he colours in the tomato, and he says, tomatoes are red. And Hanny and I, my husband's Hanny and I just look at each other, and we're just still like, you know, if we move, something might change, kind of this. So I looked at
And he never did this before.
No, he never did this before. He would never colour in a sheet. He had sentences, like he had almost like rote learn sentences that typically came from YouTube or TV or something like that he'd remember, and it's almost like an echolalia type thing. Yeah. So he would have...
But carrots are orange is a sentence.
That was a sentence in the...
moment.
In the moment that was...
relevant.
Within context,
yeah.
Right? And then he flipped the sheet over. I think we were in Shake Shack or something super healthy like that. And so he flipped over. He flipped it over. And then there was a word search puzzle. And he gets his crayon and he says, tomato, tomato, whatever, I don't know, milkshake. And he starts like cut. And Hanny and I just look at each other going, can you get your phone? Can you record this kind of thing? Didn't get it. By the time we found our phones, it was all over kind of thing. And then the next thing that happened was, because he is a kid with a lot of echolalia and verbal stimming. Verbal stimming is his thing. Like he loves this verbal stimming. But then as he was walking through the house, I realised what he was saying actually made sense. And I said to him, Yusuf, what did you just say? And he turned and he looked me dead in the eye and he says to me, that was Arabic, Mum. And I'm like, oh, where did you learn that? And he says, at school, from Miss Sabra. And this is a two-way conversation. Like, he's actually answering me. And then I looked at him and I said, And I didn't know what to say because I'd never had a conversation with this kid. You know, he'd been in my house for 10.5 years, but I'd never had a conversation with him. And I'm like, oh, do you like Arabic? And he goes, yes. And then he just kept going. So there were these little glimpses really early on, like this is less than a month in, really early on that something was changing.
You were taking 2 sessions.
We were taking 2 sachets a day, and we're still on 2 sachets a day. I'm not moving. I'm not changing. So we're still on 2 sachets a day. So we were on the 2 sachets. I tried it with Ali. He's still getting used to it. And I think we're going to start with Mariam soon. But with Yusuf, he took it immediately and he was okay taking it and he had no issues. And, you know, kids with the spectrum, they sometimes have issues with new stuff and that kind of stuff. With Yusuf, because he's been medically compromised for a long time, he's used to medicine and that kind of stuff, and he knows that generally medicine makes him feel better. So if you put it in that context, he takes it. So yeah, so we went over the summer, and we went to Egypt, and we hadn't gone back to Australia for various reasons. So we were in Egypt, and the family there were also commenting on. So it was really interesting. There were 2 very clear opinions. One of them was like, wow, he's really engaged and really active and, you know, he's interested and he's talking.
Different
and it's
kid.
very clear that he has improved. And I was saying to you earlier, one of the changes is that he is developing opinions and he has likes and dislikes, and he is no longer afraid to tell you that he has likes and dislikes. Whereas before he was this super compliant, very docile boy. Now he's got a bit of pep and a bit of oomph and a bit of, you know, life and zest in him. And so there's also this non-compliance thing. It's like, no, he was much better behaved before. And I'm like, no, this is great.
This is being an 11-year-old.
An 11-year-old boy. He should have opinions and he should have a bit of, you know, rough and tumble and that kind of stuff. But what was really interesting for me was on the way to Egypt. So, you know, he's an iPad kid. He needs, how are you going to keep him entertained for 4 hours? The flight that we were on didn't have an entertainment system. So it was dependent on his iPad and there was no internet. So I'm sitting there and I'm getting all levels of anxiety and I'm like, oh my God, what am I going to do? It's going to happen. Oh my God, da, da, da. So he then closed the iPad and he looked at his dad because, you know, his dad was beside him and he goes, time to sleep. And he put his head down and he slept. Oh my God. And I'm like, who is this kid? Who is this kid? And then you saw the shopping trolley one, like, you know, he was controlling, he was in a busy supermarket that he'd never been in before with his dad, and his dad travels 270 nights of the year, right? So dad is often away. So dad is not familiar with Yusuf, and Yusuf is still sort of getting familiar with dad. And he was following the instructions of his dad. And Hani has a lot of anxiety taking Yusuf out.
Yeah, he's not used to it.
He's not used to it, and he gets very anxious. And what if something happens? And, you know, maybe I need a nanny with me, maybe I need someone with me. And I saw Hani
feeling confident
and sort of, you know, getting a bit of self-confidence in being able to go out with his son. And again, sort of at the beach, Yusuf is a child who sees water must jump. And I remember one of the first things we did when we realised that there was this tendency, and being an Australian, right, got to teach him to swim. And he's not a very elegant swimmer, but he is extremely confident in the water now.
He can manage. He can float.
He's more than that. He swims. He sees water, gets in and swims. It's not elegant, but he's very confident.
Manages.
And it's a big challenge in the water because I'm a very fast swimmer. Hani is a good swimmer, but Yusuf is fast. And he will very quickly go to the absolute limit of where the boys and that kind of stuff are.
And he will cross.
Oh my God. And we were in January, February this year, we were in Abu Dhabi, and we were staying in the hotel. And, you know, in Abu Dhabi, the canals, and we were opposite, we weren't at the Ritz-Carlton, we were opposite the Ritz-Carlton. So he was heading for the Ritz-Carlton and he was going to cross over. It's a boat lane. And immediately, like we could see, and the lifeguards were freaking out. He was swam through into that boat lane, and a boat had to slow down. And I mean, it was dangerous stuff. And so I swam out there and grabbed him and sort of, like your life's like swimming him back in because he's kicking his dream. He wants to go. He sees he wants to go. And I was just saying over the weekend, last weekend we were in Al Quwain, and this weekend we were in Ras Al Khaimah. Last week in Al Quwain, I forgot the swimsuits because it wasn't planned to go to the beach. But we had a nice, sunset, and we said, we'll go for a walk. And I could feel this pull. He was just gently, like, sort of pulling me into...
He wants to go
in the water. And I looked at him and I said, Yusuf, you cannot go in the water. You have to stay next to me. And he looked at me and goes, okay. And it just...
And did he?
He relaxed. He stayed. He stayed beside me. And again, sort of in Ras Al Khaimah yesterday. So, what we're seeing is... And there is a natural language that's coming through. There is engagement and interaction with his brother and sister. It's they're sort of communicating more. He's still got his differences, and it's still I think there's months and months and months a road ahead of us. But he wants to engage with his brother and sister. He wants to do what they're doing at certain times, and they want to engage with him. And there is this amazing little human who's been in our house for 10.5 years who we're starting to get this glimpse of. And he started drumming. So music is his world, right? Music is absolutely his world. And he had a brain bleed at birth. So he has, some limitations in physical movement as well. So the piano he'd sort of, eke out with 2 fingers, and he would love to play the violin or the flute, but he just doesn't have that coordination or that dexterity. But since Teknon, I said, you know what? We're going to try the drums. And he is free, and he's listening, and he's following their instructions. And week on week, he's improving.
And he's playing. Actually.
And he's playing the drums. And it's this pride. You can see it in his face. He was sick as sick could be a couple of weeks ago. And he sort of said drums, and off he goes, because that's something that brings him joy, and he's enjoying it, and he's able to show us that he's enjoying it and share that.
He feels in control.
Yeah, he feels in control. That's exactly right. Yeah.
It's funny that you're saying sleep, because that's actually one of the first things you should see, right?
Correct.
So,
yeah.
Changes in bowel movements.
Yeah, typically when you go on Technon, and take the proper dosages, you'll see 3 things happen in the first 1 to 3 weeks.
Okay.
One will be improvements in their sleep pattern. 2 would be improvements in their bowel movements. Okay. Virtually every person on the spectrum, they either have diarrhea or they have constipation, but it'll correct that. And then the third thing that you'll see is they'll be calmer.
Yeah, for sure.
Those 3 things, if you see those, and virtually everybody does, in that first 1 to 3 weeks, then you know that it's going to work. Okay, and then everybody's body is different. Some people, they get to a major stage in 3 months. Some people it takes 6 or 9. The longest we've had is 13 months. And that was somebody way on the far end of the spectrum. But every person's different, every child's different, and so on. But if you get those 3 things,
then
it's going to work. Sleep, improve bowel movements, and calmness. Symptoms of aggravated behavior. I've got one patient that's 24 years old, so it's a man. Very difficult for the mother and father because he's very violent, has strong symptoms of aggravated behavior. Within that 3-week period, they didn't have any more issues with it.
Wow.
He'd become calm and functional from that respect. Now, he's got more to do. And I should also say that the earlier you do intervention with Technon, the better your long-term results are. The earlier the age. The youngest one we've got right now that we treat is 18 months old. The oldest one is 45.
Okay.
Okay, so, and everything in between. If you get them, if they're 3 to 9 years old or 2 to 9 years old, you're going to have great success. Between 9 and 15, instead of being 3 months, you probably are going to get something strong positive. I mean, other than the three, the calmness, the sleep pattern, and improvement in sleep pattern, and the bowel moves. Everybody gets that, and in the first 1 to 3 weeks. So you'll know, as a parent, you'll know, and the mother always knows.
If it's
The mother
working.
always knows when there's something improving or going wrong. You will know that it's going to help your child in the first 1 to 3 weeks. It's not something you have to wait for years. You know, I mean, let's talk about ABA therapy. How much money, how much time do you have to dedicate to that? And then how long does it take before you see any real significant improvements? It's a long time. Teknon's very cost effective, and you get results that you know are positive for your child. And let's be honest, you alluded to this before. Autism really is a life sentence for the child and the family.
True.
You will know that you will escape that pattern within a relatively short period of time.
Yeah.
Talking about cost, because once you start, you cannot stop.
That is correct.
And if you stop,
all the symptoms will return, typically beginning in about 5 days. But as long as you stay on it, you'll continue to improve, and the symptoms will stay away. But if you stop, 2 things happen. One, the symptoms will come back. It doesn't cure it. It just allows you as parents to manage it and mitigate the symptoms. Okay, but the problem with stopping is not only do the symptoms come back, but it takes longer to get them back to where they were when you go to restart it again. Your body has a memory. So once you disrupt that memory.
did you reduce any of the associated costs with what you were doing to Yusuf before? So even if you have to spend on this lifelong, any other thing got reduced, or you're thinking on the long run?
Yeah, look, I mean, Yusuf's situation, we had sort of this perfect storm at the same time. So we had decided that mainstream school wasn't for Yusuf. We had decided at that point to put him into a centre that had academics, but that was able to manage, you know, all of the a special needs setup essentially. And so we had decided in March of this year to move him. His shadow teacher, who had been with him for so many years, left and sort of had a fantastic opportunity in Canada. So, you know, so we were sort of at this stage where we had to either keep him in a mainstream school but find a new shadow teacher, or move him into a sort of a special needs centre. So we chose to move him to a special needs centre. Fabulous centre with really, you know, sort of a small classroom setting that has the academics, that is adapting it to his needs. When we had him assessed, you know, sort of back end of last year, I think it was, the assessment came back that said, you know, he's kind of functioning maybe year 1, year 2 level, and he was in year 5 at the time. And the special needs centre now, where he's there on his own, independent, without a shadow teacher, they have him sort of for English at a year 5 level, and he should be year 6, and for mathematics at a year 3 to 4 level, and he's doing that independently.
Without a shadow?
Without a shadow teacher.
What about therapy? So
therapy we have reduced. We've reduced a lot of the ABA. I've taken that out first for various reasons. But I've kept the speech, and I've kept OT, just because of Yusuf's co-complications. I think the speech is the key at the moment. And I was saying to you earlier, John, that what I'm seeing with Yusuf is this desire to want to speak, but having not done it for 10 and a half years or 11 years, he's not quite sure, he can't quite find the words. So I think speech therapy is going to be critical for a while.
Yeah. But overall, you reduced. So this is something that helps reduce the cost, not.
Yeah, we as I said, we had a perfect storm. We have had reductions in several costs that is offsetting the cost of the Teknon for sure. Yeah.
Anything else? Anyone? Any other questions for John?
Look, I want to say thank you. Teknon for us has it's given us hope, and it's given us, the ability to see possibilities that we hadn't thought of before. So I want to say, thank you, and let's keep going. Let's see how many other kids we can reach, how many other families can experience it. I've had a couple of people come up to me, both at school and sort of just in like the kids' swimming classes and that kind of stuff. So I always keep some Teknon in my bag and say, hey, try this. This is what's, but it's been interesting because people have come, so people who deal with Yusuf, so the therapy centre, for example, she rang me and the owner of the centre that we go to rang me, and she said, Yusuf's been really focused.
They didn't know?
They didn't know. I hadn't told anybody because I didn't believe it was going to work. I didn't tell anybody that we were doing this.
I told you.
Yeah, she can say I told you so. But, no, I hadn't told anybody that this was going on. And the school noticed immediately that...
So you were saying the therapy owner...
The therapy centre said, what's going on? Like, he's super focused and super engaged. And I'm like... and this was really early on, I said, so I've tried this new supplement. Just, keep me posted and let me know if you see anything that's going on. So they noticed, and the school that Yusuf was at before noticed as well. They're sort of saying, he's a bit calmer, and because Yusuf's big thing was he had to get up and shout, and not shout in a bad way, but he sings. Yusuf is a very musical kid, so he had to get up and bounce, and he needed these movement breaks, but that was reducing as well. And so the really interesting thing is the school that we're at now, I've said to them, look, midterm, I want the program to be getting him back into a mainstream school, but independent. And they're like, we're on it. We're working towards this.
Perfect.
So they don't really know about Technon. I don't know them well enough to start knowing about Technon.
I'll let them notice on their own.
I'll let them know soon.
So at the end, the quick do's and don'ts for Teknon. So no sugar, nothing hot,
nothing
no
metal,
caffeine,
no metal.
Use the shaker. Any other tips?
Limit the simple carbohydrates, not just sugar, but simple carbohydrates like cereal and things like that. Well, you're dealing with a metabolic disorder.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I mean, I understand the difficulty comes in that because of today's diet, but that's part of the reason we have a problem. Okay. But look at it as a metabolic health issue.
Yeah.
Okay. And simple carbohydrates, limit them, limit the sugar, limit the gluten. Okay, because this is gluten-free, and it won't help your child unless you get your child to take it.
Yeah.
Be creative. Most autistic parents, when I first meet them, they've tried everything. They don't believe anything works. Okay, but medical science comes up with new things all of the time.
Yeah.
Teknon is just one of the new things that fits into a need for a health issue that's growing exponentially worldwide.
Yeah,
and think about this. I follow the philosophy that the World Health Organization put out in 2001, and that is that we all should eat a diet that's consistent with the diet that our genes became programmed to respond to. Now, that's not the diet that our parents or grandparents ate, but that our ancestors thousands of years ago ate.
Yeah.
Right? And nobody in the world eats a traditional diet anymore.
True.
Okay? Teknon is a traditional food. Now, we call it a supplement, but it's a traditional food, and it provides the body the specific nutrients that somebody on the spectrum needs. But the truth is, let's be honest, everybody in the world should be taking Teknon every day.
Yeah. Thank you very much for being with us today. We really enjoyed the talk. And thank you very much for sharing with us, Fatima, your experience.
Thanks, Abby.
And we'll have more episodes speaking about gut health and about Teknon. Thank you very much.